Hello, thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins. My name is Laura, and I recently read Dune by Frank Herbert, and then I watched Dune Part 1 by Denis Villeneuve from 2021, and I will soon be watching Dune Part 2 when that is released, but between the two Denis Villeneuve Dune movies, I thought I would watch the 1984 David Lynch adaptation of Dune. And this one is kind of notorious. Like, on one hand, it's known as being really bad, and David Lynch considers it a failure, and he also feels like he let the studios and producers push him around too much, and then like financial issues too as well going on, and they wanted it shorter than he wanted it to be. But then at the same time, it definitely has a cult following, and there are people who genuinely like this movie and they find it very fun and entertaining, and and it even is a decent adaptation, you could say, up until, the halfway point, I guess. But yeah, so this one had quite the reputation, so I was very curious to watch it. And by the way, this shirt, kind of random, but I bought this shirt years ago, have never worn it. The tag was still on it. It was in a pile of clothing I was going to donate, but then I happened to be going through that pile this morning, and I was like, wow, this actually kind of has like a Dune vibe to it. For the first time since I bought this shirt, I am finally wearing it, and yeah, it kind of has that like futuristic Dune vibe, right? Even the color. So I feel like it's fitting. So luckily I saved it from being donated right in time. But anyway, back to Dune. So I will be getting into the book spoilers because this Dune movie does encompass the whole plot of the book. And so I will be getting into the details of Dune, the book. So if you do not want the book spoiled, and if you do not want Dune Part 2 spoiled at all, Dune 1984 has a different ending than the book. So I do not anticipate Dune Part 2 having the same ending as this Dune. But regardless, if you want to avoid any kind of spoilers, you should not watch this video until you have watched Dune Part 2 and or you have read the book. But yeah, for starters, this was Kyle MacLachlan's first acting movie debut, which I did not realize. And he went on to partner with David Lynch many times throughout his career. And it all started right here with his feature film debut, which I thought was kind of cool. And in general, we do have a lot of familiar faces here, which surprised me. We have Patrick Stewart playing Gurney Halleck. We have Sean Young playing Chani, and Sean Young was the main woman, Rebecca, or Rachel, in Blade Runner. And then we have Brad Dourif as Piter the Mentat, and he is from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I covered. So I will link to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I also covered Blade Runner as well. And then of course we have Sting, the singer who plays Feyd-Rautha. And there were a number of other people too, Virginia Madsen, for example. So yeah, there were a few faces that I was kind of like, oh, like that's kind of random, the collection of actors they got for this movie. But the movie begins with like this lengthy exposition by Princess Irulan, where she is just staring right into the camera and she's just explaining the premise of what we're about to see. And Dune, the 2021 movie, kind of does this too, where we have Chani telling us about her planet Arrakis and the history with the Harkonnens, but it works because we also have like visuals going along with it, where in this movie, she's just talking straight to the camera, and it was kind of a boring way to start the movie, I would say. And on top of that, there is just so much voiceover throughout this entire movie, and it was so unnecessary too. Like, it would just be explaining something that we can clearly see is happening. Like, you don't need to tell us what we're seeing right now because we're seeing it. And it was just so distracting and way over the top. And I get that the book, we did get the inner monologue of like every single character. And for a book that works, and I thought it was a really nice touch. But for a movie to have every character have voiceover constantly, unnecessarily, it did not work. And it was really distracting. And this movie, it does have a different start as well from the book, where it begins with the Emperor meeting someone from the Spacing Guild. And this creature from the Spacing Guild is asking the Emperor, he's like, hey, like, what's going on with Arrakis? Why are you moving the Harkonnens? Why are you putting the Atreides on here? And the Emperor reveals his whole plan to the Spacing Guild. And then the Spacing Guild it's like a creature. He tells the Emperor that make sure Paul Atreides is killed. We want Paul dead. And that was not in the book. Like, the Spacing Guild didn't care about Paul. But also the Spacing Guild creature is this weird like fish, worm, brain, alien looking thing. And it was kind of unsettling to look at, if I'm being honest. And I did not remember them being described that way in the book. However, I recently started Dune Messiah, and they do describe the Spacing Guild members looking this way. So this isn't just David Lynch's, own creation. It does come from the second book. But yeah, during this conversation between the Spacing Guild and the Emperor, and they're talking about how they want Paul dead, the Reverend Mother, the Imperial Reverend Mother, overhears this, and she's like, Paul Atreides, I need to look into him. And so that is why she then goes to Caladan and does the Gom Jabbar test on Paul. And I thought the Gom Jabbar test scene was pretty good, specifically like the practical effects they had going on as you see his hand, like the pain he feels where it feels like his hand is burning and like the skin is coming off. That was very visceral and very effective, more so than Dune 2021, I would say, where we just see like a charred skeletal hand. This one, yeah, it was very unsettling. And I personally find like the practical effects from the 70s and 80s like this, like in horror movies, it works so well for me. Like it looks so disturbing. And again, it's just so visceral where you're just like, oh my gosh, like it's just very disturbing. And that's what they were going for, right? With this scene is for you to feel the pain that Paul is feeling by his hand. So yeah, I thought that was very well done. And yeah, speaking of like the practical effects and how gross they were and like the body horror you had going on in this movie, I did not expect. This book is not a horror book. The new Denis Villeneuve movies, those are not horror at all. And yet this movie, with like the weird practical effects they have going on, it feels like a horror movie at times. Because again, you have the Spacing Guild, which are just so weird and gross to look at. And then you have these like body horror moments, like with his hand, which again, that like fit for the scene. But then the Baron also has, he is just like beyond gross and just like the gross body horror, right? Because he has this like weird skin disease. And I'm gonna show images, but even in the images, I'm not gonna show you the worst of the images because I don't want to have to look at it again while editing. But it was disgusting. And the first scene with the Baron, yeah, we have the stuff going on with his skin. And then the Harkonnens in general are just so gross. And then there's a part where the Baron, he like puts oil on his body and then he sees this young Harkonnen and they have these like heart plugs that you can pull out and then it just makes you bleed. And so he pulls out this guy's heart plug. It's just a gross, very gross scene. And very weird and very disturbing and stuff like that, like those practical effects that I'm talking about. You know, like I remember watching Dead Alive when I was like 20, and that movie has a lot of these gross effects, and it would gross me out, but I could handle it and I could watch it, you know? Whereas in recent years, practical effects like this, I like physically can't handle it, and it makes me feel physically sick. And this first scene with the Baron, I almost thought I was gonna throw up because that's how gross it was. So my body just can't take those scenes anymore. And yeah, the Baron, that first scene is like the grossest with the Baron, but throughout the whole movie, he is just so gross and disturbing, and it just seemed a bit over the top. Like I get the Baron is a gross, upsetting person, but it seemed like they were just going very over the top. And I know David Lynch, this is kind of his vibe to some extent with some of his movies, so it's not that I was surprised, but I did think it didn't really fit with Dune, you know, because Dune isn't this like gross horror book. Yeah, the stuff with the Baron was just a bit too over the top for my taste, but it was very effective, right? Like David Lynch achieved what he set out to do with the Baron because it worked a bit too well. Oh, and then also another horror-esque scene is Raban, when he is killed, we see his severed head. And that too was kind of shocking. And it's just like, oh, like, what is that doing in this like Dune adaptation, right? Like, why is this feeling like kind of a horror movie at times? I'm also maybe a bit of a lightweight too for others. They might think that I'm being too extreme in my views, but yeah, there were just a lot of gross, disturbing scenes in this movie. But also, while I'm talking about the Harkonnens and their heart plugs, for one, the heart plugs weren't in the book, and that also was kind of random. And what was the point of them? They never even explain it. Like, it just seems like a very easy way to kill someone. Like, is that the point? So the Baron can kill someone anytime he wants to? I don't know. But partway through this movie, as we have in the book, Thufir Hawat is captured by the Harkonnens, and then they poison him in order to kind of force him to be the mentat for the Baron. And so in this movie, they capture Hawat, they give him the heart plug, and then they tell him he's been poisoned, and he's like, yeah, the antidote for the poison is this cat. And there's like this cat hooked up to this weird machine type thing, and he's like, you need to milk this cat, and that's how you get the antidote. And also the cat, like there's a rat hooked up with the cat, and it's just like, what? What is going on right now? Like, why does he have to milk a cat for the antidote? That is so weird. And what is the rat doing here? He did not explain the rat. It's just unexplainably there. And again, just so weird. And I can appreciate weird stuff, but I don't know, maybe I just went into this movie, even though it's David Lynch, I have watched other David Lynch movies, but I just did not go into this movie expecting it to be as weird as it was. And it just felt like it was weird and gross just for the sake of being weird and gross, you know? And so, yeah, it was just so random. And as I say this, I can see why people watch this movie and genuinely enjoy it and find it entertaining. Like, I can see the appeal to a certain extent. It just isn't what I personally find entertaining and fun to watch. But yeah, in the movie, this is the last we see of Howard. We don't know what happens to him from here. And then, yeah, as far as some of the other characters, so Kyle MacLachlan as Paul, like, he was fine. I like Kyle MacLachlan as an actor. Duncan Idaho, that character, very forgettable. And then the guy who plays Leto, he was fine, but I felt like we didn't get enough scenes with him to really feel connected to him. So he was kind of forgettable also. And then, I forget the guy who plays Kynes. It's like Max von Snowden or something. I'll put his name on the screen. And again, I thought he was good. We just didn't get enough screen time with him. And then we have Patrick Stewart as Gurney. He is someone we actually do see a fair amount of. And I thought, you know, again, he was fine. Like, he wasn't bad, but it also was nothing too special. And then the guy who plays Dr. Yui, he was interesting because in the book and in the 2021 movie, you can tell that Yui, I don't know if conflicted is the right word, but he doesn't enjoy what he has to do to Leto, right? That he has to betray him and turn him over to the Baron in order to kill the Baron. You know, he definitely felt bad about it, but at the same time, he was like, sorry, I gotta do what I gotta do. Whereas in this movie, as he is drugging Leto and explaining things to him with the tooth, it almost seems like he's enjoying it, like he's savoring this moment, and it made him feel maybe a bit deranged in a way, I don't know. But also the tooth he replaces is a front tooth, and you get the poison out by biting down. And when you bite down, you don't bite down on your front teeth. So why are you, like, it should be a molar, right? Like the front tooth, that doesn't even work for biting down. But in this movie, we do get Dr. Yui with his dying words to the Baron. So he does get those in this movie, which is from the book. However, in this movie, the Baron is very, like, he's unfazed by what Dr. Yui says. Where, like I said in my other video, in the book, when Dr. Yui says this, the Baron is kind of like it shakes him up a little bit, but we don't see that in this movie. And then I know I'm complaining about this movie a lot and pointing out a lot of things I don't like. So sorry if you are someone who likes this movie. I don't mean to be coming at it this hard, but the weirding modules. So in the book, the weirding way is just the way they fight people and the way they can use their mental powers to assess a situation. And so it's their physical and mental skills with the Bene Gesserit is called the weirding way. Whereas here, they use what are called weirding modules, where it's something that's hooked up to your neck, and then you have a gun, and then you use a word, and it causes the gun to shoot. And that is the weirding way. And David Lynch said he wanted something that people could actually see and was tangible, and that is why he chose to do that. But that was a bad call, because it makes Jessica and the Bene Gesserit seem kind of pointless, right? And honestly, once Jessica becomes a Reverend Mother, she is like not even in the movie. And throughout the movie, yeah, she just isn't as powerful and impressive because the weirding way are just these like silly modules you're wearing. And so that is what Paul teaches the Fremen, is how to use these modules. And yeah, it just did not work for me. And it was just very unimpressive. Although by the end of the movie, Paul is able to use the weirding way without the modules, showing how, you know, strong he is. But also, speaking of Fremen, Chani is in this movie. She is in very little though. Her character like almost feels pointless. And they do like this montage and we get like the voiceover telling us like what has happened in 2 years. And it's like Chani and Paul fell in love. And basically she gets to make out with Kyle MacLachlan in multiple scenes. She's here a bit here and there throughout. But yeah, she isn't a big character at all here. And then, yeah, in the movie, I'm not doing like a detailed plot overview, obviously, as you can tell, but by the end of the movie, he meets up with the Emperor. He fights Feyd-Rautha, which the fight was similar to what we got in the book as well. The Baron is killed by Aaliyah. So we do see Aaliyah. And she was an awesome character in the book. I loved her. I'm so excited to see her in Dune Part 2. But yeah, she does end up killing the Baron. But even her character, like, I'm glad they made the effort to include her. But this movie, trying to fit so much into a 2-hour, 15-minute movie just is not enough time. So Aaliyah, yeah, I just wish we got more time with her too. But anyway, Kyle MacLachlan shows up with to talk to the Emperor. He kills Feyd-Rautha, but then he doesn't banish the Emperor to like Seleucus Secundus or whatever, and he does not marry Princess Irulan. Instead, he makes it rain on Arrakis. And he kind of becomes a god. And in voiceover, they say something like, where there is war, he brings peace. And where there is hate, he brings love. And then he makes it rain on Arrakis. And so I just also didn't like that. And for one, that like wouldn't make sense for Dune because rain kills the sandworms. And without the sandworms, you have no spice. And if there is no spice, a lot of people would die because they're addicted to it. And two, the Bene Gesserit, the Reverend Mothers, all of these people with powers, their powers would be hugely diminished, if not gone entirely, because the spice is a huge part of giving them powers. And then people wouldn't be able to travel to other planets. So they would just be stuck on whatever planet they're on. But the fact that so many people would die basically without the spice is kind of a huge thing where it's like raining on Arrakis actually isn't a good thing. Like you don't want to kill the sandworms, you know, you don't want to get rid of the spice entirely. But on top of that, just making him into like this loving, godlike person, you know, in Dune, the book, I'm kind of getting into what I'll be talking about in my Dune Part 2 video, but as Paul becomes more powerful, he also kind of becomes cold and heartless at times. And multiple characters comment on this being like since when did you stop caring about human life? Yeah, so I just thought that was one of the things I loved about the book was just how it made it more complex, right? And Paul is trying to prevent himself from becoming the Lisan al-Gaib, and he doesn't want this jihad war to happen, and he's trying to resist it. But also it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, I mean, on one hand, I think that Paul really was the Kwisatz Haderach and everything because he is able to do these things that were prophesized. But at the same time, it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because everybody was pushing him into being the Lisan al-Gaib and the savior and everything. And so people were looking at him to be that. And so he became that. Right? And he was always so self-aware, being like, everything I do is being turned into legend. Like this right here, right now is already being turned into legend and people are already exaggerating what has been done. And so, yeah, I just thought that he wrote, again, the Messiah trope. I thought Frank Herbert wrote about it so well. And again, that is something I will be getting into a bit more in my Dune Part 2 video. But yeah, so that was something with this movie that I didn't quite like, is that they do turn him into this Messiah, this God who is able to make it rain and who brings love and is just all around a great guy, you know? Yeah, that just wasn't quite how it was in the book. But yeah, anyway, I guess that wraps it up on just like some of the bigger thoughts I had on this movie. Again, I can see why people like it. And if you are a big David Lynch fan, I can see you liking this just as, you know, David Lynch's filmography as a whole. I can see you kind of liking this as it goes along with everything else he's done. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. And honestly, I don't think I would ever watch it again. It wasn't horrible. It was entertaining. I'll give it that. And again, some of the performances I liked, and the Baron was so incredibly unhinged, but the actor who played him really embraced it and he went all out, you know? And the effects were very effective. And again, up until they meet up with the Fremen, it almost is kind of faithful to the book. They get rid of some scenes, but once he meets up with the Fremen is when they really start speeding things up and changing things. And so that's where a lot of the differences and a lot of the issues come up are in the second half, I would say. And the sandworms, I thought they looked, you know, pretty cool for the most part. But yeah, there are worse movies out there for sure. So it's not like it's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to the practical effects specifically just really put me off. And the Baron, like I never want to watch this again because I never want to have to look at the Baron again because he was just that gross and that disturbing. And like I said, I just can't stomach that type of stuff anymore. And then, yeah, I mean, he did the best he could to get this book into a 2-hour movie, but it definitely feels rushed. And I'm almost surprised they kept the first part so close to the book because they could have kind of sped up the beginning. That way, the movie would have been more evenly paced. But the way it's paced, the first half we're kind of taking our time. And then suddenly the second half, we're doing montages and combining things and skipping things and, you know, just quickening things so much more. But yeah, anyway, that is Dune, 1984, David Lynch. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And yeah, if you love this movie and if you just really enjoy it, comment down below sharing your thoughts. And yeah, let me know your favorite David Lynch. I do love Twin Peaks, by the way. I didn't even mention that show, but that is something he did with Kyle MacLachlan later on. And yeah, Twin Peaks is fantastic. I really do love that. But anyway, if you have not yet watched my Dune Part 1 video, I will go ahead and link that on the screen so you can check that out if you have not already. And I will see you next time. Bye.